So I want to start with this story that comes out of a book called Soul Keeping. Some of you may have read it before or heard of it. It's by a guy called John Ortberg. And he was on the pastoral staff of it at some stage at a really big church in the US where they had nearly 30,000 people coming every weekend. And he had just joined the staff team there. And he went to see Dallas Willard, whose name we've mentioned already in the first couple of weeks. And as we go, you'll get more familiar with that if you don't know much about him. And he was kind of a very well-known spiritual director, mentor to many pastors and people in leadership. And he went to him with this situation going, hey, we've just moved to Chicago. We've joined the staff of this very big church. Can you give me some guidance? Can you give me some mentorship in how I can be a better spiritual leader? Because, you know, we've moved city. There's a big opportunity here. And so I'll read it to you what he says, and this comes straight out of the book. He said to Dallas, John speaking, the church where I serve tends to move at a fast clip. I also told him about the rhythms of family life. We are in the van driving, soccer league, piano lessons, school orientation, on and on and on. I told him about the present condition of my heart as best as I could discern it. And I asked him this, what do I need to do to be spiritually healthy? After a long pause, Dallas said at last, you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. To which I replied, okay, I've written that one down. And then a little impatiently, Dallas said, or a little impatiently, John said, that's a good one. Give me the next point. What else is there? And John remembers I had many things to do. There was long distance calls. So I was anxious to cram as many points of spiritual wisdom that Dallas could give into the least amount of time possible. And there was another long pause. And Dallas Willard said, there is nothing else. If you want to grow spiritually, you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. Much easier said than done. When Amy and I first moved to Joburg, we lived in Cape Town before we moved here, and it's been about 10 years that we've been here now. One of the most overwhelming things for us, aside from all the traffic and the 4-5 lane highways compared to Cape Town's 2-lane highways at that time, was the amount of billboards on the side of the road. It seemed like there was no real estate space left open on the side of the highways. In Cape Town at that stage, there weren't that many billboards compared to up here. And it was one of the biggest things, or the biggest shocks to our system, was this constant shouting for your attention from billboards wherever we went. And really, it was a metaphor for life. It is a metaphor for life. We live now in the age of what many call the attention economy. And we have work stresses, and we all have technology that's designed to keep our attention for as long as possible. Our general response can be when people ask us how we're doing, we say things like, well, I'm good, but just busy, or it's been a crazy season, or, you know, there's just been so much going on. We're doing well, but wow, there's so much happening. And it's like busy, hurry, rush, repeat. What it does over time is it leads, at the least case, to a low-grade anxiety, and at worst, it leads us to a place of overwhelm and even burnout. What Dallas Willard is saying is the thing about hurry is that it will cut your connection with God. It'll sever your connection with God, to other people around you, and even to your own soul. He went so far as to say that hurry is the great enemy of spiritual life. Now, for us as ones who want to grow in our emotional health and our spiritual maturity, as all of us have said in the poll that we did at the start, for us to do that, to be able to live in the way of Jesus, one of the things that we have to do, and this is like the non-negotiable, is we have to slow down. But how many know that that's not easy in the lives that we live, in the world that we are living now? It's like, yeah, well, you know, I'm just gonna slow down and take it easy. But many who've gone before us are adamant and insistent that this is the way. One of the keys to spiritual growth is to slow down, to ruthlessly eliminate hurry. And that's why this evening is called Slowing Down to Grow Up, because the way that we're going to grow up spiritually and emotionally is to learn first to slow down. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 to 30, it's a well-known verse, but I'll read it from the Message. He says, "Are you tired? Are you worn out? Are you burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I will show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me, and watch how I do it." Love that part. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. And if you've been around Urban Life for some time, you may remember, I think it was last January, February, we actually did a series called Rhythms of Grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you will learn to live freely and lightly. How good does that sound? Living freely and lightly, unforced rhythms of grace. Compared to the day-to-day rush, and just about all of us who did the poll answered that we often feel overwhelmed, stressed out. There's so much to do. There's not enough hours in the day. It's just go the whole time. And we can end up wondering, well, why is it that we struggle with our emotions? Why is it that we struggle in our spiritual growth? So to experience the life that Jesus is talking about, we have to adopt the lifestyle of Jesus. We have to learn from him and see what he did. He says in Matthew 11, watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace and allow his pace, his practices to be the things that steer and guide us in our lives. The bottom line is we have to ask ourselves, who are we becoming? We have to slow down and learn these unforced rhythms of grace and be able to find the rest for our souls. And that speaks to me of emotional health, taking a step towards emotional health and spiritual maturity. So I want to talk this evening mainly about two practices that we see in Scripture. And up front, and you've probably heard, or you may have heard of these before. The first one is silence and solitude, and the second one is Sabbathing, a Sabbath day, a rest day, 1 day out of 7, just a day to enjoy and be with God. Now, I thought of putting this question in the poll, but I think I know the answer to it already. It would probably be the majority of us if the question was, how many have tried to put in place some kind of rhythm, practice, Sabbath? Hey, this year I'm going to Sabbath. This year I'm going to, slow down. And we start for a while and then we kind of lose momentum and suddenly we're back to where we started. So I'm really hoping and trusting, my prayer is that as we go on this journey of small steps towards emotional health, that actually something starts to stick. I think one of the things about us as people is we can tend to be overly optimistic and begin to make many changes all at once. One of the things that I've learned from Amy in her life coaching is that the way to make change is not through big drastic changes, but actually through little changes, small changes, one at a time, slowly you put the habits in place rather than just trying to, going, okay, we're going to change everything and here we go. So that's the idea through this whole journey to emotional health is one step at a time, just one step on the journey, just one step closer at your own pace, starting from where you're at. So we're going to go this evening to Luke chapter 4. If you have a Bible with you, you can turn there. I'm going to read you a few verses out of this. And what's happening here is Jesus is just about to begin his ministry. He's just been, he's just come onto the scene. He's just been baptized by his cousin John the Baptist. And we begin Luke chapter 4, verse 1. Then Jesus left the Jordan full of the Holy Spirit, and he was led by the Spirit into the wilderness for 40 days to be tempted by the devil. He ate nothing during those days, and when they were over, he was hungry, obviously, after 40 days. And Donnie and I were talking just this afternoon about how sometimes we can have the idea in our heads that, of course, Jesus was able to achieve everything that he did, and he was able to incorporate these practices into his life and do these miracles and this and that and all these, because of course, Jesus was God. And while he was fully God, he was also fully man. So in his divine wisdom, he was able to somehow like keep the godness out of his humanness, if that makes sense. It's almost to kind of, I don't know how he did it, but to compartmentalize the two. So the idea that I would love for you to have, the picture, is that Jesus is the template or the example of what is possible for a disciple of Jesus. That's what's possible when we are empowered by the Holy Spirit, is to live like Jesus did, to become like he was. That's the idea of the transformative power of the gospel, is actually that we can become like Jesus, transformed one step at a time, one degree of glory to another. So here we see in these first few verses, he didn't eat for 40 days. He was hungry. If I didn't eat for 40 days, I think I'd be dead. I'm not sure I could make it for 40. But the interesting thing about this verse, and you may have heard others speak on it before, is that the Holy Spirit led him into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And you're like, but didn't Jesus say in like Matthew 6, teach us to pray like, God, lead me not into temptation? And here the Spirit is taking Jesus into the wilderness, into the desert, with no food for 40 days so that he could be tempted by the devil. It's this kind of weird tension of what's going on in here. And the devil said to him, if you are the Son of God, tell this stone to become bread. And Jesus answered him, it's written, man must not live by bread alone. So the devil took him up and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. And the devil said, I will give you their splendor and all this authority because it's been given over to me, and I can give it to anyone I want. If you then will worship me, all of this will be yours. And Jesus answered him, it's written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. So he took him to Jerusalem and had him stand on the pinnacle of the temple, and he said, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here. And then it's kind of like the devil lifts his game a bit, because he starts quoting scripture at Jesus, and he says, for it is written, he will give his angels orders concerning you to protect you, and they will support you with their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. I don't think it's ever a good idea to quote scripture at Jesus to try to get your point across. And Jesus answered him, it is said, do not test the Lord your God. And after the devil had finished every temptation, he departed from him for a time. And then Jesus returned to Galilee in the power of the Spirit, and the news about him spread through the entire vicinity. And this is a key part for it. After these 40 days of fasting and a season of being tempted by the devil and it says in verse 13, after every temptation. I mean, we read about 3 of them here that Luke gives us, but there could have been a whole bunch more that we may not know about. But after the devil had finished every temptation, the devil left him for a time. Now, one of the things that has been taught before, but is really key to notice here, is we may have the idea, because we think about ourselves in our physical bodies, like after 40 days of not eating, you're going to be hungry, you're going to be weak, you're going to be tired. Why is it that the Holy Spirit would take Jesus into the wilderness, into this desert place, to go through all this, like not eating, to a point of, could we say, like physical weakness, and then the devil comes? And we may think that, the devil is scheming and he's just waiting for the opportunity for Jesus to get to the lowest of the low, to be hungry, to be tired. I mean, you guys may have heard of that thing before. When you're hungry, when you're alone, when you're lonely and you're tired, be careful, because the enemy's coming and there could be a temptation coming your way. So you've got to be on guard. It's that, like, the halt, stop. If you're hungry, alone, lonely, tired, Jesus is hungry, alone, lonely, tired, enemy comes, and Jesus is able to resist him. But actually, Dallas Willard, he suggests that the wilderness is actually not the place of weakness, but rather it's the place of strength. It's the place where Jesus was able to go away from all the distractions of the world, away from other people, away from anything else that might hinder his focus, and actually press in and lean into the presence of God with nothing else going on. So it's almost like we can read this story and think, yeah, the enemy's coming when Jesus is at his hold point, so that he can try and trip him up. But actually, God in his wisdom leads Jesus into the wilderness for 40 days of silence and solitude in the presence of God. So many would say that actually Jesus was at his strongest spiritually after these 40 days, rather than at his weakest physically, which is why he was face to face as a human, able to withstand every temptation from the devil. So there's something key in this idea of going into a wilderness place to be just with the presence of God, to forget about everything else, to extract yourself from the day-to-day of life, and just to be in the presence of God. The Greek word for the wilderness is the eremos. It means a lonesome place, or a wasteland, like a desert, a desolate place. It speaks of solitude. It's not the place of weakness, it's the place of strength. And Jesus doesn't leave it there, just these 40 days spending time with God. This kicks off his ministry, it's what sets it up. But actually withdrawing to be with God becomes a rhythm of his life. If you've ever read through the Gospels before, you would have seen time and time again, Jesus withdrew to the desolate place, to the eremos, to the quiet place. He left everything and he went to be alone with God and to pray. In Luke chapter 5, 15, 16, after like really busy day on mission, Jesus is out there doing miracles, healing people, engaging with people. The news about him begins to spread. People are coming at him from every direction, bringing their problems because they've heard like there's help here and there's healing here. Verse 15 says the news about him spread. Large crowds would come together to hear him and be healed of their sicknesses. And verse 16, this is the key one. It says, yet he often withdrew to deserted places and he prayed. And there's a rhythm, there's a practice in the life of Jesus of withdrawing from the busyness and the hurry and the rush of life, just to be in a quiet place, a lonely place, a solitary place, just to be in the presence of God and to spend time in his presence and to pray. And you may say, like I think, well, but Jesus didn't have to do this, and Jesus didn't have any kids, and Jesus didn't da-da-da-da, and we can come up with all these excuses. But I think this is the bottom line. If you think that you are busier than Jesus was, it's likely that you're not in an emotionally healthy place. I think there's a little bit of work that needs to be done. And it wasn't just Jesus that set this example. In fact, John the Baptist before him, and we were speaking out of Luke chapter 1 this Sunday at church. And if you get right to the end of the chapter, I actually read it on Sunday, in verse 18 of chapter 1 says, and John grew up and became strong in spirit, and he was in the wilderness, in the eremos, in the lonely place, in the solitary place, in the desolate place, until the day of his public appearance to Israel. So we know, okay, he wasn't fasting for all that time. He was eating like locusts and honey and all these kind of things, but he was in the wilderness place for years before he began his ministry. Even Paul, the apostle who wrote a huge amount of the New Testament, in Galatians chapter 1, verse 17, he speaks about the time where Jesus encountered him and he was knocked off his horse. And he said, I didn't go straight to Jerusalem to the others who were apostles at that time, but actually what happened is I went to Arabia, and then only later I came back to Damascus. And some say that season may have been about 3 years where Paul was in a solitary place with God, as best as we can understand. So there's something key in this, is in a preparation for all that God has for us, in a preparation for life, but not just in the beginning of our ministries, but actually what we see from Jesus is there's something key in the practice, in the rhythm of removing ourselves from the day-to-day, from the hurry, from the busyness, and getting into a place, a solitary place, a lonely place, a quiet place, to be in the presence of God. Now, if your life is anything like mine, this is so different. This rhythm of making time and space for God, the busier things get, it's completely opposite to what normally happens in my life. Usually what happens is the busier that I get, one of the first things to go out the window is that alone time with God. And instead of it being a lengthy period of just being in the presence of God, of reading the Bible, or praying, or listening to worship, whatever that may be, that moment gets reduced to perhaps a few rushed minutes, or maybe it's just like I don't get to it today. We'll get there tomorrow. There's grace. Jesus will understand. And then tomorrow doesn't happen. And suddenly it's a week and it's a month. And if you've been following Jesus for some time, I'm sure you can testify to the same kind of challenges. I think one of the things is that we struggle just to be in the moment. Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I'm God." We read that and we know it, and we may be able to quote it and other verses like it, but actually just to be still is a huge challenge for us as people. I know it's a huge challenge for me, and I'm guessing for many of you, it's the same thing, just to be in the moment. One of the reasons is all the demands that are on us. There's work pressures. If you have kids, they have to be here, they have to be there. It's like John Ortberg talking about, there's piano lessons, and there's this, and there's that, and this next thing, and there's a boss or a manager who's chasing you for something, and there's all, social life and social media and everything, and it's just like go, go, go the whole time, and we end up living in this place of kind of split attentions everywhere, and we have this almost, it moves between stress and anxiety and burnout and overwhelm, and it's just like, I just want a moment just to be and just to breathe out, but it can be so hard to get there. So the busyness is one part of it, but there's something else in us as well, which is not satisfied with just being in the present. Many of us, I think we can actually be scared of being in the present. If we said now, well, let's take 5 minutes and just be quiet in our own places and spaces. Some of us might be okay with that, but many of us may be like, this is really awkward. Like, okay, well, we're being quiet. What do I do now? What's coming next? And our minds always jumping to what's coming next. Or one of two things happen, where our minds jump to what's coming next. What should we be thinking about? What do I need to prepare for? What have I got to do? Or our minds jump to something that's happened in the past. And we can begin to think about and play that movie over again. In fact, Blaise Pascal, a philosopher from time gone by, said this, and this is a deeply challenging quote. It's in the notes, so you can just listen to this, you can read it afterwards. He says, "We do not rest satisfied with the present. We anticipate the future as too slow in coming, as if in order to hasten its course." And we see this in our kids. They're like, I wish I was 10. I wish I was 18. I wish I was there. Always looking for the next milestone. I wish I was in grade 4. I wish. And Amy and I are like, don't stop wishing your life away. But we do this. We anticipate the future. It's too slow. The future's too slow in coming. We want to hurry it up. Or, he says, we recall the past to stop the future's too rapid flight. In other words, we think of the good old days. Remember the time gone by. Like, we're scared of the future coming. So let's go back. Let's retreat into what's gone and think about that to try and slow the future down. So imprudent are we that we wander in the times which are not ours and do not think of the only one which belongs to us. Isn't that amazing? We think the future doesn't belong to us and the past doesn't belong to us. The only moment that we have is the one that's right here. It's the present, but we don't want to be in the present. So idle are we that we dream of those times which are no more and thoughtlessly overlook that which alone exists. And here's why. For the present is generally painful to us. We conceal it from our sight because it troubles us. And if it be delightful to us, we regret to see it pass away. We try to sustain it by the future and think of arranging matters which are not in our power. Anyone who likes to control things in the room, for a time when we have no certainty of reaching. Let each one examine his thoughts, and he will find them all occupied with either the past or with the future. We scarcely ever think of the present. And if we think of it, it's only to take light from it, to arrange the future. The present is never our end. The past and the present are our means, and the future alone is our end. So we never live, but we hope to live. And as we are always preparing to be happy, it's inevitable that we should never be so. It's kind of depressing, but it's so true. I think we spend our lives either preparing for the future, thinking, reminiscing, regretting the past, and we find it so difficult just to be in the present. And one of the things we can learn from Jesus is how, one, to retreat from the busyness of rush of life, but actually just to be in the present, like we looked at last week in the Garden of Gethsemane, Matthew chapter 26, where Jesus is he's sitting in that moment. He's not thinking about the past. He knows what's coming, but he's in the present. And slowing down for us, creating space in the present moments and doing this in the presence of God. This is what will allow us, this is the key to feel what's actually going on inside and to be able to ask the question, why is it that we are feeling the way that we are? And that's why slowing down is the key to us growing up in emotional health and spiritual maturity, is catching the heart and actually being willing to commit to slow down. And last week we saw Jesus was able to sit and face his emotional pain. He was able to recognize it, to express it, and to understand it. Simply put, he was aware of what he was feeling, and he was able to understand why it was that he was feeling that way. Now, we may think, well, that's quite obvious. I mean, he knew what was coming. He knew that he was probably going to end up on the cross because it had been prophesied before, and he was praying about it, like, God, please I'm not, if there's any other way, we miss this part of the story and just skip to the end. So he knew that was coming. But again, what it is a template for us to show us how not to be trying to escape our emotions, not to be distracted by something else, but actually to face those not nice emotions head on, to name them, to understand what they are and where they're coming from, and to ask the question, well, why am I feeling this way? Many of us in the poll in the beginning said the majority of us battle to actually articulate what it is that we're feeling. So that's step one, is to be able to start to name the emotions that we're feeling. The second step is start to ask the question, well, why am I feeling this way? And this is the journey to emotional health. That's in the presence of God. We want to grow in recognizing these emotional indicators. Donnie shared the slide with me this week, which said emotions are amazing indicators, but they're terrible navigators. Emotions are amazing warning indicators, like they let you know something's going on, but they're terrible navigators. Like, you don't really want to trust your emotions to make big decisions. You want to process them and understand them and interrogate them, but they may not be the best navigators. So we recognize them, become aware of what we're feeling, and then we interrogate them simply by asking the question, why is it that I'm feeling the way that I'm feeling? Now, Dr. Caroline Leaf, who some of you may have heard of before or read some of her stuff or follow on social media, she says, this is why it's so important to learn to recognize your emotional and physical warning signals or indicators, because our bodies detect problems in our subconscious before we are even consciously aware. In other words, your body and your emotions, your feeling can pick up on things even before it's in your conscious mind. So learning to tune in, learning to sit with and question the signals, that'll help you to start working on an issue before it actually becomes a major problem. The trouble is, many of us don't do this. Most of us haven't done this well. So the things that we're dealing with are already big, major problems. It doesn't mean that we can't work through them, but because we haven't, in many cases, taken the time to sit down and understand and process, suddenly we're dealing with stuff that's been going on for a long time. And we just may even think, well, this is just normal. This is how it should be. But as we grow in this journey, we start to become aware of the emotions, process them in the moment, so it doesn't escalate to the point like we spoke about in week one, where it's kind of that shaken up 2-liter Coke bottle of suppressed emotions that eventually, when it does get open, it's just a big mess everywhere. Now, the thing is that we are the only creatures that God has created who are actually able to think about what we're thinking about. I don't know if I'm sure you've had this experience as you catch yourself thinking about something, and then you start thinking about, well, why was I thinking about that thing? And you can go down like a rabbit hole, thinking about the thing that you were thinking about. So nothing else can do that except humans. So we have this ability kind of to observe our thoughts. So I'm not talking about like an out-of-body experience or anything like that, just so we're not like, you don't go like Garrett's going all weird on us, but you've done this. You've thought about something, and then later you've thought about, well, why did I think about that? So this is the point we want to get to with our emotions. And maybe this is your week. I don't know. Maybe if you just stopped and The reason why we don't do this, or a big part of the reason why we don't do this, is simply because we're too busy. We battle to sit in the present. So what we do is we say things like, well, you know, the next thing's coming. I've just got to stuff this stuff down inside of me because I don't know, the next meeting's coming, or the next school run is coming, or the next whatever is coming. And so I can't deal with this right now. In some point in the future, I will deal with it, but not now. And we just move on, and it builds up and it bottles up. And we don't take these moments of selah and pause like Jesus did in God's presence, actually just to be. And I think the reason why Jesus was able to do what he did in the Garden of Gethsemane is because he had a lifestyle and a rhythm of removing himself from the busyness of life and being in the presence of God. So it takes him to a place of emotional maturity, to emotional health, where he can actually name his emotions. He can understand where they're coming from because he processed them. Drastic emotions, big emotions, not nice emotions. He processed them as he went. He learned to do that. And for many of us, this is the journey we're going on now, is to learn, okay, how do we do that? So in week 1, we started the journey of becoming aware of your emotions. And that's a continual practice. That's something I would love to encourage you to keep doing. You don't just, okay, week 1 is done, tick, I know how to be aware of my emotions now, and let's get on to the next thing. Otherwise, we're a bit like John Ortberg speaking to Dallas Willard, going, okay, you've told me not to hurry, what else is there? And the guy's like, no, that's it. If you want to grow spiritually, you have to eliminate hurry from your life, nothing else. So this could be your week. Perhaps you're feeling like really stressed out. If you stopped and if you took a moment, actually, let's do that for a moment. We won't do it for long, but just take 30 seconds. This may be a little bit awkward, but just take 30 seconds just to think about how your week has been so far. So we're 3-4 days into the week. Okay, so you have maybe a thought, an idea, a word. Maybe it's many things. Maybe it's just like, you have no idea what my week has been like so far. I mean, I've had a little bit of a week like that with these now extended family. So we get the idea. Maybe you're feeling like, hey, I'm really stressed out. The next step is to go, I wonder why. Maybe the answer is obvious, but likely the answer is not so obvious. Perhaps it's you going, I'm really feeling on edge. The next step is to go, I wonder why I'm feeling on edge. Feeling really down this week. I wonder why. Let's take it a bit further. I wonder why I'm angry at my spouse for something so stupid and small. This happened, like moment of vulnerability, this happened to me this week. Amy said something to me, and I was like, ah! And afterwards, I was like, because we're going on this emotional health journey, I was like, well, I better process this, because the thing that Amy said actually, like, she didn't say anything wrong. It wasn't anything negative or something, but there was a frustration in me that came from another person, another conversation that I brought into this conversation. And had I not taken the moment just to stop and go, actually, Amy, like, help me process this a little bit. Okay, I was frustrated from a previous conversation. I brought that into the conversation with you, and we were able to talk it through and go like, okay, so we understand this is not a personal thing between us. Actually, the root of this is coming from somewhere else. In time gone by, it may have just been the, like, she said something, I get angry, then she gets angry because I got angry, and she doesn't feel like I should have got angry, and then I feel like I need to justify myself, and it turns into a big fight over something that had nothing to do with her in the beginning. You get my point. These kind of things happen because we don't take the time to go like, why am I angry? Maybe you got something coming up in this week and you're dreading it, whatever it may be. You go like, why am I dreading this meeting? Or perhaps there's someone in your world this week that you're avoiding, or maybe it's been going on for some time. You stop and think, well, why is it that I'm actually avoiding that person? Maybe you're going, why do I care so much about what other people think about me? Like really, why do I really care so much about what other people think of me? If you're on social media a lot, and I think we've all been there at some stage, there's this kind of a stress or anxiety in us that builds up over time. Feels like I got to either check my feed or I've got to post. I need to make another post. Like why is it that I always feel like I have to make another post? Because what happens, the feeling becomes normal. I got to post, so we just go with it and we post because it becomes a habit. But if we stop and think, like, what is driving this? Why do I always feel like I have to make another post? Perhaps it's why when I see somebody else who seems happy, do I feel a little bit sad? Why is it when I look at someone else and they seem like, they're doing okay and they have it together, like I wouldn't really admit that to anyone else, but why is it that I feel sad? Or why is it that I feel comparison rise up in me all the time? Like, what is that? Where does it come from? Like, why? It's a good day and suddenly there's this thing of comparison in me and I'm comparing. Like, where does that come from? Why am I feeling like that? Or perhaps you may ask this week, why have I been so critical and just like mad with people, frustrated with other people? Why is it? Is it just a bad week? Why am I feeling like this? Or why do I spend like the most of my life just working, pushing myself, like feeling this drive, like I have to achieve more, I have to achieve, like, where does that come from? Why do I feel like that? Or maybe on the other side, it's like, why do I feel like not working at all, like ever? Why do I feel like I have no drive, no motivation? Like, where does that come from? Some of that I may have said, like, yeah, okay, that's speaking to me. Some of it may be like completely like nowhere and you've got something else. But the point is, I think so often, and I know I don't do this enough, and maybe it's the same for you, don't do this enough and just stop and ask, why am I feeling the way that I am? Why did I react the way that I did? Part of the reason is we don't like to be in the present. We're thinking about the future. We're regretting or reminiscing the past. And the other part of the reason is just simply because we're too busy and we're just going, like the question at the beginning, there's just not enough time in the day. I've got too much to do. And then we look at the lifestyle of Jesus and his promises to us. And he says, come to me and watch and learn. And in this place, you'll find rest for your souls. We're kind of like, yeah, Jesus, okay, but give me the next thing. Like John Ortberg with Dallas Willard. And Jesus is like, no, there's nothing else. Come and learn from me. Watch what I do and do what I did. This is the way to find rest for yourselves. This is the way to emotional health. This is the way to spiritual maturity, is to do what Jesus did in the presence of God. Now, in week 1, if you were part of the story right in the beginning of week 1, we did a separate poll. I pulled up the answers from that. Also, the same thing from almost never to almost always. And I looked at it in week 1, but in preparation for tonight, I went back and I looked at it again. And don't worry, it's still anonymous. But here's the thing. 63% of us as a group say that we do not regularly spend time in the Word and in prayer. Now, I don't know where you are in your spiritual journey. You may be in the room and you don't follow Jesus at all, and that's cool. I'm really glad that you are here. And you may be following Jesus for a long time, but as a group, as a collective, 63% of us don't regularly spend time in the Word and prayer. So we can fall into that place of going just like, well, life is so busy and there's not enough time. And, my spiritual journey is like church on Sundays and catch up here and there, whatever it may be. And then perhaps I don't know if this is more scary or as scary, same thing. And this is not a guilt trip. This is just, I think for all of us, is a reality check, because all of us answered that question in tonight's poll. We want to grow emotionally. We want to grow in spiritual maturity. Jesus shows us the way to do it. And we look at what we're doing and we go like, okay, most of us, we're not doing that. It's kind of like, okay, go figure. Here we go. This is not it's difficult. It's not easy, but actually it's a simple change or commitment from us that we can make. So 94% of us say that we do not Sabbath regularly. So one of the other practices that we see from Scripture is the practice of Sabbath. And what that is taking one day out of the week, one day out of 7, some say. Take a 24-hour day from Friday evening to Saturday evening, or whatever it may be, Saturday morning until Sunday morning. So it's like 24 hours in your week to disconnect from work and just make space and time to be in the presence of God. Now, if we were 100, there would be 6 of us going like, okay, we're doing that, we're crushing it. Huge majority of us, and this is nothing new, huge majority of us, we're not managing to fit that somehow into our week. And usually our excuse is, I just don't have time. There's so much going on. There's always just more demands. And I think this is where the enemy gets us. And he's just happy for us to continue following Jesus without growing spiritually. And yeah, sure, like if we died, we'd go to heaven and we're saved and all those kind of things. But I think he steals our impact here by keeping us consumed with distraction and busyness and all these kind of things, and bogged down with these emotions. And again, it's not just to be happy all the time, but it's to be able to process in a good, authentic way. And the key to this, from the life of Jesus, from the Scriptures, is actually to slow down and to be in the presence of God. So the question is, are we missing something? And I think part of the challenge is we may not want the wilderness. Like, honestly, going into silence and solitude, that's scary, especially if you're more extroverted. Like if you're more to the introverted side, like you're like, this is fantastic, keep speaking, tell us, just time alone with God, that'll be amazing. But the extroverts amongst us go like, this is crazy. How am I going to spend like 10 minutes by myself doing nothing, without a phone, without any sound, with nothing? Like, I can't do that. You can do that. It's going to look different for all of us. And the introverts amongst us may spend more time alone, the extroverts a little bit less, but we carve it out what works for us. The point is, if we want to grow in emotional health and spiritual maturity, and we've all said we do, like one of the things we have to do is put these practices in place in our lives, daily, weekly, monthly, to carve out time to be in the presence of God. I think it was Martin Luther who said, the busier I get, the more time I spend with God. And for us, it's usually the inverse. It's like the busier I get, the less time I spend with God, because God will understand. And sure, there is grace for that. And this is not at all from a religious, like, hey, you have to do this. But actually, if you want to grow, the place where it happens is in the presence of God, when we make space and time for him. David Allen, who's a very well-known time management kind of guru, who wrote a book called Get Things Done just after the turn of the century, so 2002, somewhere there, said, you don't need more time. What you need is more space. So all of us have 24 hours in a day. We're not going to get any more or any less. We all have 24 hours. But how we create space in that time, that's the key. Because our default is like, hey, I just need more time. I wish there was more hours in the day. Then I'll be able to fit this in. Then I'll be able to fit in the Sabbath. No, you don't need more time. You're not going to get more time. What you need is more space. So part of this rhythm of slowing down is actually creating space in our life. And that the tough thing is, for many of us, that means saying no to a whole lot of good things. For some of us, we're like, yes, you give me permission to say no. I give you permission to say no to a whole bunch of things. You have to say no to be able to create space in your life. If you keep saying yes to stuff that doesn't matter, you'll have no space in your life. And honestly, I think many of us get to that point. We're just like, I'm so busy, I'm so busy, I'm so busy. It's okay, well, let's look at your calendar, and it's just full of stuff that we don't want to say no to, because we want to, like Brene Brown said last week, we want to be loved and we want to belong. So we're scared if we say no, we'll disappoint people. And that's where we end up. And many of us, I think, are there. So I have nearly done. I just want to share some, like 2 caveats when it comes to spiritual practices and spiritual disciplines. The first one is this. You can do all the spiritual disciplines. You can like fast, you can do silence and solitude, you can do prayer, you can do Sabbath, you can do examen, you can do all the spiritual disciplines, and there's like 7 or 8 or 9 or even more of them. And you can still not be prepared to look below the surface. So the caveat here is don't just add a spiritual discipline to your life in the hope that the spiritual discipline is going to be the thing that brings about the transformation. The spiritual disciplines for us, they are practices, they are habits. This is what they do. They create space in our life for the Spirit and the truth of God to transform us. So the discipline itself is not the thing that transforms you, but the discipline is something that allows space in your life for God to come and do the transformation. So if you put a discipline in place without allowing God to come into that space, in other words, being willing to be vulnerable and open yourself up in the presence of God to God, if you're not willing to do that, then discipline will just become a religious exercise that brings about frustration. And in 6 months or a year, you'll go, you know what, I've tried that. I've tried silence and solitude. I've tried Sabbathing. I've tried fasting. Like nothing happened. So the point has to be, if we're going to put a discipline in place, the reason why we're doing it is because we're prepared to be vulnerable in the presence of God. So that we go back to last week. Jesus showed us how to do that, to express those, even those not nice desires, emotions, feelings in God's presence. So that's why we started there last week, is that's what we want to be willing to do. And the disciplines are things that help us do that. Also, God is not impressed by our spiritual disciplines. The more you do, he loves you the same. The less you do, he loves you the same. The disciplines are things for us. So don't see these spiritual disciplines as tick boxes like, yes, I'm going to, God's going to bless me more because I'm now doing spiritual disciplines like this. I'm doing silence and solitude Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sabbathing on Sunday is like, good. Yes, here we go. That's not how it works. Discipline is, again, it's create space in your life for God to bring about the transformation. So that's the first caveat on spiritual disciplines. The second thing is, when it comes to solitude, don't think of solitude as isolation. We've all been through a season of lockdown, isolation, those kind of things, like disconnecting from people. Solitude is disconnecting from community for a short time and then coming back into community. Solitude is not you and God alone and you never connect with another person for the rest of your life. That's not solitude. That's isolation and that's loneliness, and it's not healthy. You need time alone with God. You need time with your community. One of the ways that we've learned to express it is God works things into you when it's you and him, and he works those things out of you when it's you and others. We need both. We need both silence and solitude, time with God in the word and prayer. He's forming you, he's transforming you, then you back into community within the context of community. He's working those things that he's put into you out in the community. So solitude without community will lead you to isolation and loneliness. But on the other hand, community without solitude, it's just going to lead to stunted spiritual growth and emotional unhealth. And I think that's the status quo for many of us at the moment, or for many people who follow Jesus, is we have community, but we don't have the solitude. So we're trying to work all this stuff out, but we haven't created the space for God to work stuff in. So we need both. There's a solitude and community. So I have something, we're going to go a little bit over time this evening, just 10 minutes. And the reason why I want to do that is just, I want to share with you some like really practical stuff from Peter Scazzero, who wrote the Emotionally Healthy Spirituality course, which has helped shape some of what we're going through at the moment. And he's going to speak about the common questions that we have as we get into the practical. So we're going to watch that, and then I'm going to share like a homework charge with you. These are things he's going to talk about. 4 ways to slow down in a fast-paced culture. So we're all like, okay, I'm in, Gareth, but now like tell me how to do it. So he's going to tell you 4 ways of how to slow down in a fast-paced culture. He's going to tell you how to make room for silence and solitude in your workday and how he does it. And he's also going to speak about how to take a Sabbath when life is so busy. So let me get that up onto your screens. And it's about 9 minutes, and then we'll wrap up with some homework, a homework charge for this week, and then we'll be done for this evening.
How do I slow down in a fast-paced culture? Let's put it this way. If you don't, you'll die as a leader because it'll just suck the life out of you and you'll end up having nothing to give out to others. So here's 4 things that I would say are probably pretty core, pretty indispensable. The first is that you remember your first work. Your first work is to be a contemplative before God, like David was, and David was in Psalm 27:4. For David's life, he understood one thing I ask of the Lord. This is what I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon his beauty and to seek him in his temple. So the first way you're going to slow down in a fast-paced culture is to remember your first calling is to seek his face, to gaze on his beauty, to be with him is your calling. And that's what a leader is. A Christian leader is first being with Jesus. That needs to be on your job description, like number one, be with Jesus. The second is Sabbath, and I've talked about that lots of different places, but I would say Sabbath is a spiritual formation discipline. You're not saved by Sabbath. You're not saved by prayer. You're not saved by a Bible study. You're not saved by being part of a local church. But if you're not praying, you're not doing Bible study, you're not Sabbathing, you're not part of a community, you're probably not growing very much. In other words, there's certain spiritual practices that are indispensable. Well, I would say probably one of the core spiritual practices to slow down is Sabbath. For a 24-hour period, you stop your work. You rest from things that suck life out of you. You delight in the glory and the beauty of God all around you, and you see the invisible God in the visible creation. A third is the daily office. I am a big believer in slowing down, and I get a rhythm like out of Benedictine spirituality, morning, midday, evening, that you create a rhythm of stopping to be with Jesus. And again, it might be short times in the afternoon and evening, but you've got a rhythm that my whole life is being with Jesus, and I've actually structured my days to slow down and be with him every day. And vacations, you name it, he is my life. And then finally is you divide your days into thirds, morning, afternoons, and evenings. And you just make a commitment. I'm not going to work 3/3 of a day. I may do it once in a while, but I don't work morning, afternoon, and evening. So if you're going to be out in the evening, that means you take off either in the morning or the afternoon. Again, it's all around a theology of limits, but God has put all kinds of human, emotional, physical, and spiritual limits on you that you cannot work in 70, 80-hour week and sustain that long term and have a walk with God out of which you give out of the overflow.
Now you're going to find yourself that you've got more demands on you than you can possibly meet. In fact, I had a wise mentor tell me early on when I was in my 30s, I asked him, how do I get away from all the pressure I'm under? I just want to relax. I want to enjoy Jesus. I want the easy, light yoke of Christ. And he said to me, well, Pete, I got good news and bad news. The bad news is the older you get, if you're faithful to Jesus, you're going to grow, and the demands on your time are going to actually increase over the decades. And I can assure you that is true. But the good news is you'll care less. You'll be more discerning and hopefully wiser in embracing the limits God's given you and hearing his voice and being able to discern what has God given me to do and not to do. And again, Jesus is our great model. I mean, Jesus clearly, he didn't heal every person in ancient Palestine. He didn't raise every dead person. He didn't preach the gospel to every person. He didn't travel to Europe or Africa or Asia. He lived within a 200-mile radius of where he was born. Very short 3-year ministry, died before he was 33 years old. But he was able to say, I finished the work, Lord, that you have given me to do. We each have a small piece, right, in God's eternal tapestry of what he's building in the world. And we want to be faithful to that piece. But don't do Joe's piece down the street, Mary's piece over in the next town. Do what God's given you to do. I think of John the Baptist. He's a great model. He knows who he is and who he isn't. And he's able to say, I'm not Elijah, I'm not the Messiah, but I'm called to baptize. And he was clear. He was a forerunner. And then when his time was up and people were starting to follow Jesus, he was fine. He goes, a person can receive only what is given him from heaven. He is very content. And he dies a very premature death. In the same way, you've been given something to do by God, and that's what you want to joyfully enter into and do. That's where the great fruit is going to be. And I find when I'm doing things that God's not given me to do, first of all, it's exhausting. But secondly, it's not nearly as fruitful as when I'm patiently and in a very relaxed way entering into what he has given me to do. And that's why Sabbath is such a marker. It's like an oil light in a car to say, okay, there's oil in the car. Sabbath is a core marker that I'm walking in God's rhythm and I'm actually letting go. So pick yourself a 24-hour day, 24-hour period each week in a rhythmic way and declare that holy time unto the Lord. And you're doing it, you're receiving it as a gift, that you're stopping all your paid and unpaid work, and you're actually looking for things that bring you delight. So we got to plan and think it through. Now, Jews have been doing Sabbath for 3,500 years, so they know a lot about it. They'll start with a timer, a candle. They got a ceremony to begin it and the end it. My wife and I, we do 6 p.m. on Fridays to 6 p.m. on Saturdays. And that is our time. It's our Sabbath to the Lord our God. And we look forward to it. We plan it. We're going to a play this week in Manhattan. We're all excited about it. Last week we went for a long walk and had lunch with my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, and we walked through Manhattan. We love nature. So it's thinking through what's going to give you life, what's going to replenish your soul. The key word is delight. You're receiving from God grace, and you're letting go of all work. And so the unpaid work of life that's got to be done, you do that during the week. So you're not working an 80-hour week. You're actually embracing limits, surrendering, and what an act of worship. Believe me, not only are you going to be better for it, everyone around you is going to be better for it, and you'll really be a greater gift from God to all those around.
So the question's often asked, how do I make time for silence and solitude in my workday? With great difficulty, of course. There's nothing in our culture that encourages it. You're not living in a monastery. We're living in active places, separated from communities actually doing it. So it takes a lot. So you've got to basically come to the place saying, if I don't do this, there's going to be a lot of consequences. I would say very simply that without silence and solitude, your relationship with Jesus is going to be very limited. It was Henry Nouwen who said years ago that without silence and solitude, it's virtually impossible to grow in the spiritual life. Now, I didn't expound on it why, but the reason is because without that, our relationship with God becomes transactional. I pray. I'm asking a lot of petitions to God. I got requests, but I'm not really listening. I'm not being with him. I end up, an image of God in my mind becomes created that's almost distorted. And again, like I said, transactional. Silence and stillness shifts things powerfully. And your focus now is communion of being with him. I like to call, there's intercessory prayer, there's confessional prayer, there's worship, there's spiritual warfare. But silence and stillness is being prayer. It's being with Jesus. And so I've written a couple of daily office books, Emotionally Spirituality and Relationships Day by Day. And I encourage people to start with 2 minutes. Set your alarm and do just 2 minutes. But it's just meant to get people started. Once you get into silence and stillness and really this two-way relationship with God, and you taste it, you will not be able to live without it. You cannot go back, because a part of you comes alive. You were created for silence and stillness. So I want to encourage you, what I do is every morning, now for me at this point, I'll spend 20 to 30 minutes in the morning, minimally. Now, I don't necessarily start with it. I might start with it. I might be in the middle of, scripture or reading a devotional, but I'm going to have a 20 or 30 minute time. I'm going to be still before the Lord. I'll set my alarm before him, and I'll have a little silence in the midday and evening, but I don't set any kind of alarm for it. I'm doing silence actually at different portions of the day at this point. Silence is the background of all of life. It's being present to it. Do you realize there's always silence, but it's behind the noise? I mean, when God created the universe, it was silent. Then the Lord spoke and he created the galaxies and the world. So silence is not the foreground, it's the background. And we're being present to it. Because God has given the gift of silence. So I've been silent in Times Square in the midst of great noise. So you want to begin to exercise those muscles. And again, I encourage you to use your clock as your timer on your phone perhaps, but begin to exercise those muscles, and you're going to find it's like running around a track. All of a sudden it's going to get easier and easier. It's going to become a part of you. And you'll say, how did I ever live without this?
Some helpful stuff in there. So for this week, for homework, my encouragement to you would be to begin with this question: to take a look at your life and to answer what practices make up your current day and weeks, official or unofficial practices. What does your week look like? What does your month look like? Monday through Sunday. Monday is work, Monday evening is this, Tuesday, whatever. You fill it out, and just start to take a look and make an assessment of what your week, what your month looks like, the rhythms, the practices that you have in place. And then to dig into these practices and ask yourself, well, what would you like to add or cut out or change? And sometimes we actually don't, make the space or time to actually take a look at our weeks and how they're laid out. But when you draw it out, when you map it out in terms of what's happening Monday through Sunday, you can start to identify, hey, there's some things in here actually I would like to change. And this is one of the steps that you can start to plan, create some space. And then I would encourage you, some of you may already have these practices in place, so you can build on them or adapt. But if you don't, if you're new to this, some recommended practices to start this week is to make a simple commitment to a daily time away from your phone. Just a quiet time away from your phone, maybe with 10 minutes or even 2 minutes. And maybe when you wake up and you could read a song.
Just leave it on my desk.
Just to notice that God is with you in that moment. And then to give it a go for a Sabbath. So I know this is probably one of the tough ones, because people go like 24 hours, like how am I going to do that? And I think sometimes we have the idea that a Sabbath is like, it's a 24-hour prayer meeting and you're not allowed to do anything else. And it's you and you in the garden and you're there 24 hours. But one of the things which Peter Scazzero, I think, helps us understand is actually it's a time of delight. It's doing the things that bring you joy. And Psalm 23, the God, you lead me beside quiet waters and make me lie down in green pastures. You restore and you revive my soul. And that for me is a beautiful picture of a Sabbath. It's actually a time where your soul is replenished, where you're doing something with friends or family where there's a delight. It's disconnected from the normal day-to-day. It's a time of enjoying God. And then third part of this, so first one is daily quiet time, second one is a Sabbath. Book out a 24-hour time in your week. However, you work to make space for that. You may not get it right in the beginning, but you got to move some things around to be able to do that. And then third part is join in the church community on Sunday, either online from wherever you are or in a Power of 10 home. So those three simple things are kind of baseline practices for us, things that will help us get going on this. And just remember where we started on this as well with the poll. Like, it's not like you're the only one on the call who's not doing this. Like most of us, 94% of us, we're not doing this. So we're doing this together. We're going like, okay, let's figure this out. Next week, we can maybe share some feedback. How did it go? Some helpful things. So this is all in the homework notes. So everything that I'm saying, you'll be able to catch up later as well. It's not about trying harder, but this is about training. The rhythms that we put in place are things that it's not effort-based. Yes, we have to set them up, but we're training ourselves. It's not a performance-based thing, but it's a practice. And start small. So like I said right up front in the beginning, when I was talking about Amy and the life coaching, it's tempting just to overreach and overextend and go for broke from day one. Like, we're just going to change the world from now. Actually, just start where you are at. Don't start where you feel you should be. If you are new to following Jesus, don't try to do something like someone who's been following Jesus for maybe 20 or 30 years. Like, just begin where you're at, start small. And also, when it comes to silence and solitude, like, know who you are. So consider your personality. If you're introverted, you're going to want to spend more time in the quiet. That's cool. If you're extroverted, make sure that you're spending enough time with people as well. So you're not just like starving yourself with that social connection that you need, but also like you got to figure out what's good for you in the space. And then also don't be too hard on yourself, like have grace. So consider your season of life that you're in when it comes to spiritual practices. So for example, if you are a parent, if you have little kids, go easy on yourself. Don't look at everyone else who maybe doesn't have kids or whose kids are out the house or something and go like, they can spend like hours in silence and solitude, but I've just got like mom, dad. So kids are great reminders to us that our time is actually not our own. And they teach us about patience and becoming a person of love and becoming more like Christ and all those kind of things. And then lastly, I've also included some extra reading because this is a big topic. So if something catches your heart in this and you feel inspired and you want to learn more, there's tons and tons of great material and books out there. So I've put a few key ones there. John Mark Comer which kind of sums up and refreshes the thoughts of Dallas Willard and some others in his book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, which some of you may have heard of or read. It's a great book. There's a 45-minute teaching that I included there, which is kind of intro to the book. It captures it. In the heart of this, don't listen to it on double speed or read the book like, just the idea here is to slow down. So rather set it to half speed, and because that's what we do, right? We just default to the like, okay, I want to consume the content. Just give me the next point. The next point, actually just slow down, even if it takes you a year to read. Do that. Another book called Invitation to Silence and Solitude by Ruth Haley Barton. Super helpful book. She explains the practicalities of silence and solitude, what to expect that when you, like she addresses some of the fears that we may have, like what if I do this and God doesn't show up? Like what then? Because that's one thing that we can be scared of. You want me to sit alone for 10 minutes and like hope God shows up? What if he doesn't? Then we have a whole bunch of rejection issues, but that's a talk for another time. He will show up. He's there already. He wants you to spend time with him. And then if you're into time management and habit creating and those kind of things, if you want to make some space in your life, 3 really good reads there. First one, Eat That Frog by Brian Tracy. Amy can testify to that. It's been super helpful, I know, for her in time management, and I've watched her capacity grow as she's implemented some of the things from that book. I think it's like a 2-hour read, so you can do it pretty easily. The older one I mentioned, Get Things Done by David Allen. It's a little old, but the principles are fantastic. They're brilliant. I use that approach in my personal, like, getting things done. And then Atomic Habits by James Clear. Very helpful book in terms of breaking old habits, unhelpful ones, and putting in place new habits or new rhythm ones. Same idea, start small. Don't try and change the world all at once. Just begin where you're at and make small changes to make a big difference. So there's tons and tons and tons of stuff there that I haven't mentioned. There's more, so I'd love, if you are interested in this, you want some more resources, helpful stuff, you have comments to share, love to hear from you. Any feedback, questions, and all those kind of things that you may have anytime, reach out. I'm happy to chat more. And next week, just to give you a heads up in terms of where we're going, next week we're going to talk a little bit about going back into some of our past, not like our direct past, but more like what's come before in our generational lines and those kind of things, and picking up on some of those things to be able to deal with them and understand how it plays out in our lives now to be able to help us move forward. And until next week, enjoy the practices this week. Be praying for you and trusting that it goes easy for you, and that you're really able to find something that works for you in the space and have some awesome and amazing encounters with God as you create some space in your life to meet with him.